Hey Atlanta, welcome to another deep dive. We're really excited to bring this one to you today because we're talking about something that's so fundamental to, you know, really building a life here in our city, and that's home ownership.
Yeah, it's something that we get asked about a lot, obviously, at Erie Realty here in Atlanta. And there's just so many good reasons to think about owning a home here in our community. So we want to dive into those today.
Yeah, we're going to try and keep it, nice and straightforward for you too, because
Yeah.
we know you're busy and we want to give you the info you need without, overwhelming you with too much jargon or anything like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We want to keep it real and relevant to your lives here in Atlanta.
Right. So let's jump right in with I think one of the most basic things that people think about when they think about owning a home, and that's that pride of ownership, right? You're not just
Yeah.
renting, you're not just, temporarily in a space. This is yours.
Yeah, it's that feeling of, really putting down roots in a place and making it your own right. And that's something that you just don't get with renting. When you own your home, you have the freedom to personalize it, to make it truly reflect your style and your needs.
Yeah, you can paint the walls whatever color you want. You can, plant a garden, you can renovate the kitchen. You're not limited by a landlord's rules or, a lease agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about having that autonomy and control over your living environment. And that's a really powerful thing. It can make a big difference in how you feel about your home and how you experience it on a daily basis.
And it's not just about the aesthetics either, right? There's also that sense of stability that comes with owning a home. You're not subject to rent increases or, having to move every year or two because your lease is up.
Right? It's about building that long-term security for you and your family,
Yeah.
knowing that you have a place that's truly yours and that you can stay in for as long as you choose.
Mm.
And that could be a huge peace of mind, especially in a city like Atlanta, where the rental market can be so competitive and unpredictable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of security, let's talk about the financial side of things because owning a home in Atlanta, it's not just about having a place to live, it's also a really smart investment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Historically, real estate has been a very strong investment.
Hmm.
And while there are always going to be fluctuations in the market over the long term, home values tend to appreciate.
So what you're saying is that even though, prices might go up and down in the short term over the long haul, that Atlanta property that you buy is likely to increase in value.
Exactly. And, that means that you're not just putting money into a place to live, you're actually building wealth over time. You're creating an asset that can benefit you and your family for years to come.
Yeah, and that appreciation, it can really add up over time, especially in a market like Atlanta where we've seen such strong growth in recent years.
Right. And, it's not just about the potential for appreciation either. Owning a home can also be a good hedge against inflation because as the cost of living goes up, the value of your home is likely to go up as well.
Okay, so we've talked about, the pride of ownership, the stability, and the investment potential of owning a home in Atlanta, but there's also another really important financial advantage that we need to discuss, and that's the tax benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Home ownership comes with some pretty significant tax breaks that can really make a difference in your bottom line.
So like what are we talking about here?
But one of the biggest ones is the mortgage interest deduction. When you have a mortgage, a large portion of your monthly payment goes towards interest, especially in the early years of the loan.
Right.
And the IRS allows you to deduct that interest from your taxable income, which can save you a lot of money come tax time.
Okay, so basically, the government is giving you a tax break for owning a home by letting you deduct that mortgage interest.
Exactly. It's one of the biggest perks of home ownership, and it can make a real difference in your overall financial picture.
And it's not just the mortgage interest either, right? There's also a deduction for property taxes.
That's right. The property taxes that you pay on your Atlanta home are also deductible on your federal income taxes. And, that can add up to some pretty substantial savings, especially considering that property taxes in Atlanta can be pretty high.
Yeah, for sure. So between the mortgage interest deduction and the property tax deduction, Atlanta homeowners can potentially save a lot of money on their taxes each year.
Exactly. It's one of the ways that the government encourages home ownership, and it's definitely a benefit worth considering.
Okay, so I'm sure there's some fine print here, right? Like are there any catches to these tax benefits?
Well, there's one important thing to keep in mind, and that's that you need to itemize your deductions in order to claim these benefits.
Okay, and what does that mean exactly?
So basically, when you file your taxes, you have two options. You can either take the standard deduction, which is a fixed amount that everyone is eligible for, or you can itemize your deductions, which means that you list out all of your eligible expenses like mortgage interest, property taxes, charitable contributions, and so on.
Got it.
And if the total of your itemized deductions is greater than the standard deduction, then you'll save more money by itemizing.
Okay, so it's like a, choose your own adventure kind of thing. You got to figure out which option is going to give you the bigger tax break.
Exactly. And, the standard deduction has been increased in recent years, so it's more important than ever to do the math and see which approach makes the most sense for your individual financial situation.
Right, so it's not just a, automatic slam dunk. You gotta crunch the numbers and figure out what's best for you.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about the tax benefits of owning a home in Atlanta. Now, let's fast forward a little bit and talk about what happens when you decide to sell your home. Because I understand there's some tax advantages there as well.
Absolutely. When you sell your primary residence, you can potentially exclude a significant portion of your profit from capital gains taxes.
Oh, wow. So you're telling me that if I buy a home in Atlanta, live in it for a while, and then sell it for a profit, I might not have to pay taxes on all of that profit.
That's right. If you meet certain requirements, you can exclude up to $250,000 of profit if you're single, or $500,000 if you're married filing jointly.
Wow, that's a pretty sweet deal.
It is, and it's one of the biggest financial benefits of homeownership, especially if you've lived in your home for a long time and seen a significant appreciation in value.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are the requirements that I need to meet in order to qualify for this exclusion?
Well, the main one is that you need to have owned and lived in the home as your primary residence for at least 2 out of the 5 years before the sale.
Okay, so it's not like I can just buy a house, flip it, and then claim this exclusion.
Right. It's really meant to benefit people who are using the home as their primary residence, not investors who are just looking to make a quick buck.
Got it. So it's got to be your actual home, your main squeeze.
Exactly.
Okay, so assuming that I meet those requirements and I'm able to exclude some or all of my profit from capital gains taxes, what kind of tax rate am I looking at on the remaining profit, if any?
Well, the good news is that even if you do have to pay capital gains taxes on some of your profit, the tax rates are typically lower than your ordinary income tax rates.
Okay, so it's still a better deal than just, earning that same amount of money through your job.
Exactly. It's one of the reasons why real estate can be such a tax-efficient investment.
Nice. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the pride of ownership, the stability, the investment potential, the tax benefits, and now the capital gains exclusion when you sell your home. But there's one more really important financial advantage of home ownership that we need to discuss, and that's equity.
Yeah. Equity is one of the most powerful ways that homeowners build wealth over time.
So remind me again, what is equity exactly?
So equity is basically the portion of your home that you actually own outright.
Yeah.
When you first buy a home, you typically make a down payment, then you take out a mortgage for the rest of the purchase price.
Right.
And as you make your mortgage payments, you're gradually paying down the principal balance of the loan, and that increases your equity in the home.
Okay, so it's like I'm chipping away at that loan little by little, and as I do that, I'm building up more and more ownership in the property.
Exactly. And, the longer you own your home and the more you pay down your mortgage, the more equity you'll have.
Okay, and why is that so important? Why is equity such a big deal?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, equity is a form of forced savings.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you make a mortgage payment, you're essentially putting money into a savings account that's tied to your home. And second of all, equity can be used as a financial resource down the road.
Yeah.
If you need to access cash for a major expense like a home renovation or your child's education, you can tap into your home equity through a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit.
Oh, okay. So it's like having a big piggy bank that you can access if you need to.
Exactly. And, that can be a really valuable safety net to have, especially if you encounter unexpected expenses or financial challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like equity is a really important part of the financial equation when it comes to home ownership.
Absolutely. It's one of the key ways that homeowners build wealth over time, and it can provide a lot of financial security and flexibility.
Awesome. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, but before we wrap up, I think it's important to acknowledge that home ownership, it's not all sunshine and roses, right? There are some responsibilities that come with it as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Owning a home, it's a big commitment, and it's not something to be taken lightly.
So what are some of the things that people should be aware of before they jump into home ownership?
Well, there are the obvious expenses, like your mortgage payments, property taxes, and homeowners insurance. But there are also ongoing maintenance costs that you need to budget for, things like repairs, landscaping, and so on.
Right. You got to mow the lawn, you got to fix the leaky faucet, you got to keep things in good shape.
Exactly. And, those costs can add up over time. So it's important to factor them into your budget and make sure that you're financially prepared to handle them.
Yeah, you don't want to be caught off guard by, a big repair bill or something like that.
Right. And, there's also the time commitment that comes with homeownership.
Yeah.
You're responsible for taking care of the property and making sure that everything is running smoothly.
Yeah, it's not like renting where you can just call the landlord if something breaks, you got to handle it yourself.
Exactly. So, it's important to be realistic about the time commitment and make sure that you're willing and able to put in the effort.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like homeownership, it's a big decision with a lot of factors to consider.
Absolutely. It's not right for everyone, but for those who are prepared to make the commitment, it can be an incredibly rewarding experience, both personally and financially.
Well said. Okay, so to wrap things up today, we've talked about a lot of the key advantages of owning a home in Atlanta. We've discussed the pride of ownership, the stability, the investment potential, the tax benefits, the capital gains exclusion when you sell, and the importance of building equity. And we've also talked about some of the responsibilities that come with home ownership.
Right. We really hope that this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what it means to be a homeowner in Atlanta and that it's helped you to weigh the pros and cons and decide if it's the right path for you.
Absolutely. And, if you're thinking about buying a home in Atlanta or if you're just curious about the market, we encourage you to reach out to us at Erie Realty. We're a team of experienced local real estate agents, and we're here to help you navigate the process and make the best decisions for your individual needs.
Yeah. We're passionate about helping people achieve their homeownership goals, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have or just chat about the market in general.
That's right. You can reach us anytime at 678-775-8108. That's 678-775-8108.
We look forward to hearing from you.
And thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Atlanta. We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.